When this experience was sent to us, we asked Dr. Ronald to share a video of himself recounting his experience. However, due to certain factors he revealed to us, we decided to share his experience in this format instead. What he reveals is more important and urgent, as there is little time, and the world needs to hear this message without delay. Kindly tell us where you are watching from, so that we can pray for you and connect as one family. My name is Dr. Ronald Chen. I've been an emergency room physician for 22 years here in Phoenix, Arizona. I've held dying patients' hands. I've delivered babies in the back of ambulances. I've worked through pandemics, shootings, and chaos that would break most people. I'm a man of science. I believe in evidence, in data, in what I can see under a microscope. I'm the guy who rolls his eyes when patients talk about seeing bright lights or hearing voices. I've always chalked those stories up to oxygen deprivation or medication side effects. But after what I experienced, after being clinically dead for 9 minutes, I saw something. I was shown something. And I was sent back with a message that I cannot keep to myself, even if it costs me my medical license or my reputation. Let me start from the beginning. December 27th started like any other post-Christmas shift. The ER was packed. You know how it is after the holidays, people who ignored their chest pain through Christmas dinner, kids who ate too much candy, old folks who slipped on icy driveways. I'd been on shift since 6 a.m., and by noon, I hadn't even had time to drink the coffee that had gone cold on the nurse's station counter. I remember looking at the board. 18 patients waiting. 6 critical. 2 trauma bays full. My attending physician had called in sick, which meant I was running the entire department with just 2 residents and 4 nurses. The weight of it all was crushing. Every decision was life or death. Every second mattered. Around 12:30 p.m., I was intubating a 68-year-old woman who'd had a massive stroke. My hands were steady. I'd done this procedure 1,000 times. But as I was securing the tube, I felt this strange flutter in my chest. Just a little skip. I ignored it. Probably just stress, I thought. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. But then it happened again. This time harder. Like someone had reached into my rib cage and squeezed my heart with an ice-cold hand. I stepped back from the patient. One of the residents looked at me with concern. "Dr. Chen, you okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't okay. My left arm started tingling. That's when the doctor in me knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't stress. This wasn't indigestion. This was a myocardial infarction. A heart attack. And it was a big one. I tried to walk toward the hallway, tried to tell someone I needed help, but my legs gave out. I remember the floor coming up fast. I heard the crack as my head hit the linoleum. Then I heard screaming, nurses running, someone yelling, "Doctor down! Doctor down!" The pain in my chest was like nothing I'd ever felt. It was a crushing, burning, ripping sensation all at once. I couldn't breathe. I tried to suck in air, but my lungs wouldn't work. My vision started closing in from the sides, like someone was slowly turning off a light. I heard my colleague, Dr. Sarah Martinez, shouting orders. "Get the crash cart. Start compressions. Somebody page cardiology." I felt hands on my chest, pumping hard. I felt my ribs crack under the pressure. The pain was excruciating, but then suddenly, it wasn't. Suddenly, I felt nothing at all. The next thing I knew, I was floating. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But I'm telling you exactly what happened. I was hovering about 8 feet above my own body, looking down at the scene below. I could see myself lying there on the floor, my shirt ripped open, my skin a grayish blue. Dr. Martinez was straddling my chest doing compressions while a nurse was bagging me, trying to force air into my lungs. Another nurse was frantically setting up the defibrillator. I wanted to tell them I was fine. I wanted to say, "Sarah, I'm right here. Stop breaking my ribs." But I couldn't speak. I had no voice. I was just this awareness, this consciousness floating in space. I watched them shock me once. My body jerked on the floor like a fish out of water. The monitor still showed a flat line. Again. Sarah screamed. "Charge to 300. They shocked me a second time. Still nothing. That's when something strange happened. The ceiling of the ER just dissolved. It didn't crumble or break apart, it simply ceased to exist. And I felt this pull, this irresistible force drawing me upward. I shot up through the hospital, through floors I'd walked on for decades. I could see patients in their rooms. I could see the cafeteria where I'd eaten lunch 1,000 times. I flew through the roof and suddenly I was above Phoenix, looking down at the sprawl of the city, the highways, the desert stretching out in every direction. The sky was impossibly blue. I kept rising higher and higher, faster and faster. I thought maybe I was going to outer space, to some cosmic hospital in the stars. But then I stopped. I stopped in front of a light that was so bright it should have blinded me, but somehow I could look right at it. And standing in that light was a figure I immediately recognized. Not because I'd seen him in paintings or movies, but because every cell of my being knew who he was. Jesus. I know some of you reading this are already dismissing what I'm saying. You're thinking it was a hallucination, a neurological event, a cascade of DMT released by my dying brain. Trust me, I've read all the studies. I've heard all the scientific explanations. But what I'm telling you is that this was more real than anything I've ever experienced in my waking life. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a drug trip. This was as real as the chair you're sitting in right now. He didn't speak with words, not at first. It was like his thoughts just became my thoughts. He communicated directly with my soul. And the first thing I felt from him was love. Overwhelming, unconditional, infinite love. I started crying, not with my body, because I didn't have one, but my soul was weeping. I tried to move toward him. I wanted to be near him, to stay in that love forever. But he held up his hand, stopping me. Then he spoke. His voice was gentle but carried the weight of eternity. He asked me a question that cut right through me. He wanted to know why I had come. He asked me if I thought I was ready. I stammered something about being a good person. I told him I'd saved lives. I'd helped people. I'd donated to charity. I went to church most Sundays when I wasn't on call. I'd done my best to be a decent husband and father. He looked at me with such sadness in his eyes, and that's when he told me something that shattered my understanding of everything. He explained to me that I had built my life like I built my medical career, with impressive credentials on the outside but with no real foundation underneath. He revealed to me that I was what he called spiritually vulnerable. He showed me an image of my house back in Phoenix, the house I'd worked so hard to buy, with its nice neighborhood and good schools. But in the spiritual realm, my house had no walls. No roof. No doors. It was completely exposed, wide open to any storm that came along. He told me I'd spent 20 years learning how to heal physical bodies but I'd completely neglected the spiritual health of my own household. He said I treated church like a social club, somewhere to show up occasionally, to feel good about myself, to check a box that said I was a good person. But I had no real relationship with him. I had no prayer life. I had no understanding of spiritual warfare or protection. He told me I was like a doctor who knew everything about treating disease but refused to wash his own hands. I had the knowledge, I had access to the truth, but I'd never actually applied it to my own life in any meaningful way. I started pleading with him. I asked him what storm. I asked him what I needed to do. I begged him to give me another chance. That's when he waved his hand, and everything changed. He made a motion like drawing back a curtain, and suddenly we were looking down at Earth. I could see the entire United States spread out below us like a living, breathing map. Cities glowed with millions of lights. Highways were veins of red and white as cars moved along them. Everything looked normal. Everything looked stable. Then he showed me a calendar, hanging in the air like a hologram. The pages began to flip. January 2026. February 2026. March 2026. The pages moved faster and faster. And then it stopped. The calendar froze on a date in late spring, early summer of 2026. The exact date wasn't clear to me, but I knew it was somewhere between May and July. What happened next, I will never forget as long as I live. I watched as the first change occurred. It started on the East Coast, in New York City. The skyline, usually blazing with light even in the middle of the night, suddenly went dark. Not gradually. Not section by section. All at once, like someone had flipped a master switch. Within seconds, it spread. Philadelphia went dark. Boston went dark. Washington, D.C., the capital of the most powerful nation on earth, went completely black. Then it jumped to the Midwest. Chicago's towers disappeared into darkness. Detroit, Cleveland, Indianapolis, all gone. The wave of darkness continued sweeping across the country. I watched Dallas go black, the city I'd lived near my entire adult life. Houston, San Antonio, Austin, the entire state of Texas lost power in what seemed like minutes. Then the West Coast. Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, every major city on the Pacific coast went dark. He told me this wasn't just a temporary blackout. This wasn't a storm that knocked out power lines or a cyber attack that could be fixed in a few days. He revealed to me that the power grid had suffered a catastrophic failure, a cascading collapse that couldn't be repaired quickly. The infrastructure had been neglected for so long, pushed beyond its limits for so many years, that when it finally gave out completely. He showed me power plants sitting idle. He showed me substations burned out and destroyed. He showed me transformers that would take years to replace, if they could be replaced at all. The electrical grid that powered modern American life had died, and it wasn't coming back anytime soon. I stared down at the darkened country, and the reality of what I was seeing started to hit me. No power meant no refrigeration. No pumps for water treatment plants. No gas station pumps. No grocery store scanners or refrigerators. No ATMs. No cell phone towers. No internet. Everything that made modern life possible was gone in an instant. Then he directed my attention to the highways. From above, I could see every major interstate in America. And what I saw made my stomach turn. Interstate 10, the highway I'd driven countless times between Phoenix and California, was completely jammed. But these weren't normal traffic jams. The cars weren't moving at all. They were abandoned, doors hanging open, belongings scattered on the pavement. He zoomed my vision in closer, and I could see what had happened. When the power died, people had panicked. Everyone had the same idea: get out of the cities, get to somewhere safe, get to family in rural areas. Within hours, millions of people had flooded onto the highways. But they hadn't gotten far. I watched scenes playing out across the country. Cars running out of gas on the side of the road, their drivers frantically trying to flag down other vehicles for help. But nobody stopped because everyone was in the same desperate situation. Gas stations overwhelmed with massive lines, then running dry within hours. People offering thousands of dollars in cash for just a few gallons of fuel, but the pumps were dead without electricity anyway. He showed me a father with his family stranded on I-95 outside of Richmond, Virginia. They'd made it maybe 50 miles from their home in the suburbs. The minivan sat dead on the shoulder, completely out of gas. The man was standing on the highway, trying to wave down help, but the other cars just drove past. His wife was in the front seat crying. His 3 kids were in the back, scared and confused. Then I saw what happened next. Another car, also running on fumes, pulled up behind them. A man got out, and I thought maybe he was stopping to help. But he wasn't. He saw the gas can strapped to the roof of the minivan. He walked up to the father and pointed a gun at him. Just like that. No words. Just desperation and violence. The father put his hands up. The man with the gun took the gas can, which was empty anyway, and drove off. This scene repeated itself thousands of times across America. I-95, I-10, I-80, I-40, I-5, every major highway became a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. People started walking, trying to get to somewhere, anywhere. But most had no real plan. They just knew they couldn't stay in the cities. He revealed to me that modern Americans had forgotten how to walk long distances. People who drove everywhere, who took elevators instead of stairs, who ordered delivery instead of cooking, these people now had to walk 20, 30, 50 miles with no training, no proper shoes, no supplies. I saw them collapsing on the side of the road from exhaustion, from dehydration, from heat stroke. Then the vision shifted to the neighborhoods, the suburban streets where normal families lived. These were communities like mine, middle-class areas with manicured lawns and good schools, where people knew their neighbors' names and waved hello at the mailbox. But what I saw was the complete breakdown of civility. He showed me a neighborhood in a Dallas suburb, not far from where I actually lived. I recognized the types of houses, the layout of the streets. Two neighbors, men who had probably chatted about football and lawn care 100 times, were now standing in a driveway screaming at each other. One man had a small generator, maybe 2,000 watts, probably bought years ago for hurricane season and then forgotten in the garage. When the power went out, he'd pulled it out and got it running. His house had a few lights on. His refrigerator was still working. He'd become the only house on the block with power. His neighbor saw this and came over with an empty gas can. He asked, probably politely at first, if he could borrow some gas to run his own generator, just to keep his medications refrigerated, to keep his elderly mother cool in the summer heat. The man with the generator said no. He didn't have enough gas to share. He had a family to protect. An argument broke out. Voices were raised. The neighbor went back to his house and came back with a baseball bat. He wasn't asking anymore. He was demanding. The man with the generator went inside and came back with a shotgun. I watched this scene play out. Two grown men, probably both churchgoers, both with families and jobs and mortgages, now standing in a suburban driveway pointing weapons at each other over 5 gallons of gasoline. He showed me this same scenario repeating across the country. Neighbors fighting over generators, over stored food, over water, over batteries, over propane tanks. People who'd lived next to each other for years, who'd attended the same 4th of July barbecues and Christmas parties, now viewing each other as threats. I saw grocery stores with smashed windows and empty shelves. Not because of organized looting, but because of desperate families trying to feed their children. I saw pharmacies being broken into by people trying to get insulin, heart medications, asthma inhalers, medications they needed to survive but couldn't access because the electronic systems were down and the supply chains had collapsed. He showed me gas stations where armed men stood guard over the pumps, rationing fuel at insane prices, $50, $100, $200 per gallon, and people paying it because they were desperate. Then he showed me those same gas stations a week later, burned to the ground after someone decided if they couldn't have the gas, nobody could. But what disturbed me most was the look in people's eyes. These weren't criminals or bad people. These were teachers and accountants and nurses and construction workers. But the veneer of civilization had been stripped away so fast. Within weeks of the grid going down, the social contract had dissolved. It was every family for themselves. Then he showed me something that made everything else pale in comparison. Something that made the violence and the chaos look almost manageable by comparison. I noticed a change in the atmosphere. The sky took on a strange quality, like it was getting darker even though it was the middle of the day. Then I saw it creeping across the landscape. A fog. Thick and red, the color of old blood. It rolled across the ground like something alive, something with purpose and intelligence. It didn't follow the wind. It didn't dissipate in the sun. It moved with intention, flowing uphill, seeping through neighborhoods, wrapping around houses. I asked him what it was. I could feel the dread rising in my spirit even before he answered. He told me this was a spiritual attack, an assault on the human soul unlike anything that had happened in modern times. He explained that when the physical systems collapsed, when the phones stopped working, when the internet went dark, when the news channels went off the air, when people lost all sense of connection and information, it created an opening for something demonic to sweep across the land. He revealed to me that this red fog was a spirit of fear, of hopelessness, of crushing depression and despair. It fed on the chaos. It grew stronger with every act of violence, every moment of panic, every selfish decision. And once it reached a certain strength, it began to hunt. I watched in horror as the fog approached homes. I saw it seep under doors, flow through closed windows, penetrate walls like they weren't even there. Concrete couldn't stop it. Steel doors were meaningless. Expensive security systems detected nothing. He showed me a wealthy neighborhood with massive houses, the kind that cost millions of dollars. One house had been converted into a fortress. The owner had spent a fortune on his preparations. The basement had been turned into a bunker with reinforced walls, filtered air systems, enough food and water to last for years. Gun safes full of weapons and ammunition. Communications equipment. Medical supplies. solar panels and battery banks. This man had thought of everything. I watched as the red fog approached his property. It flowed right through his fences, through his reinforced doors, down into his underground bunker. The man was sitting there with his family, surrounded by all his preparations, all his supplies. They were physically safe. They had everything they needed to survive. But when that fog touched them, something changed. I could see it in their faces. The hope drained from their eyes. The will to keep fighting just evaporated. The man looked around at all his preparations, at all the supplies he'd gathered, at all the plans he'd made, and it all suddenly seemed pointless. He revealed to me what happened next, and it broke my heart. This man, who had done so much to prepare, who had tried so hard to protect his family, walked upstairs, went to his gun safe, and took his own life. His family, infected by the same spirit of hopelessness, soon followed. He told me this scene was repeating across the country. People who had physical supplies but no spiritual protection were falling into such deep despair that they couldn't see a reason to continue. The fog stripped away every coping mechanism, every rational thought, every spark of hope. It left only darkness and the overwhelming desire to make the pain stop. He showed me bunker after bunker, fortress after fortress. Preppers who'd spent years getting ready for societal collapse, who had detailed plans and extensive supplies. But none of it mattered against this spiritual attack. I saw a family in rural Montana. They'd built their homestead specifically for this scenario. They were off-grid, had their own well, raised their own food, had weapons and ammunition stockpiled. They'd done everything the survival blogs and YouTube channels told them to do. The red fog found them anyway. It didn't care that they were self-sufficient. It didn't care that they had years' worth of food. Within days of the fog reaching them, the father was sitting on his porch, staring at nothing, unable to make himself do even basic tasks. The survival instinct that had driven all his preparations had been snuffed out like a candle. He explained to me that this was a weapon designed specifically to counter physical preparation. For decades, Americans had put their faith in material security, in money, in supplies, in weapons, in bunkers, in systems and plans. They'd believed that if they just had enough stuff, enough resources, they'd be safe. But this attack bypassed all of that. It went straight for the soul, for the will to live, for the hope that makes survival possible. And against that kind of assault, bullets were useless. Food stockpiles were meaningless. Bunkers were just expensive tombs. He told me that no amount of physical preparation could stop the red fog. No gun could shoot it. No wall could block it. No door could keep it out. This was a spiritual battle, and it required spiritual weapons. Then he helped me understand what this red fog really represented. It wasn't just fear or depression in a general sense. It was the direct consequence of what America had become, of what the people had chosen. He showed me that for decades, the country had been pushing him out. Prayer had been removed from schools. The 10 Commandments had been taken down from courtrooms. Churches had compromised their messages to be more palatable, more entertaining, more focused on self-help than on holiness. Families had stopped reading the Bible together, stopped praying together, stopped going to church together. He revealed to me that people had replaced dependence on him with dependence on systems, on government programs, on economic growth, on technological solutions, on medical interventions. They'd built their entire lives on the assumption that these systems would always work, would always be there, would always provide. But these systems were built on sand. And he was allowing the sand to wash away. The red fog was what rushed in to fill the vacuum when those systems collapsed. When people lost their cell phones and social media and streaming entertainment and 24-hour news cycles, all the things they'd used to distract themselves from the emptiness inside, they came face to face with the reality of their spiritual condition. And what they found was terrifying darkness. He told me that people who had no relationship with him, who had never developed their spiritual lives, who had never learned to pray or read scripture or hear his voice, these people had no defense. They'd spent their whole lives numbing themselves with entertainment and business and material pursuits. When all of that was stripped away and they were left alone with their own souls, they discovered they'd been running on empty for years. The fear and depression weren't just reactions to the physical crisis. They were the natural state of souls that had been separated from him, suddenly exposed to their own emptiness with no distractions to hide behind. What disturbed me most was watching people I would have called good people fall victim to the fog. I'm talking about folks who went to church, who volunteered in their communities, who donated to charity, who were kind to their neighbors. People who, by all outward appearances, were decent, moral citizens. But he showed me the truth about their spiritual condition. He revealed to me that going to church on Sundays wasn't the same as having a relationship with him. Writing checks to ministries wasn't the same as prayer and worship. Being a good person according to human standards wasn't the same as being spiritually prepared for warfare. He took me inside the spiritual houses of some of these people, and what I saw shocked me. From the outside, their lives looked stable and blessed. Nice homes, good families, steady jobs. But in the spiritual realm, their houses had no walls. There were doors hanging open. Windows were broken. The foundation was cracked and crumbling. They'd never learned to pray with authority. They'd never read the Bible with any consistency. They'd never fasted or worshipped or engaged in any spiritual discipline. Their faith was superficial, based on feelings and traditions rather than on a genuine encounter with the living God. When the red fog came for them, they had no defense. They tried to pray, but they didn't know how. They'd never developed that muscle. They tried to quote scripture, but they'd never memorized any. They tried to stand on their faith, but they'd never built a foundation. He told me that the people who fell the fastest were often the ones who'd considered themselves religious. They'd been lulled into complacency by their Sunday attendance and their good deeds. They thought they were ready, thought they were protected, but they'd never actually tested their faith. They'd never had to stand against a real spiritual attack. And when the red fog touched them, they crumbled immediately. He continued showing me the progression of this catastrophe across 2026. The vision moved forward through time, showing me month by month how things deteriorated. By late summer, the violence had escalated to levels that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Without law enforcement, most departments had disbanded as officers abandoned their posts to protect their own families. There was no one to maintain order. Gangs roamed freely. Warlords emerged in different regions, controlling resources and territory through force. But even worse than the physical violence was the spiritual oppression. The red fog had become so thick in some areas that you could almost see it with physical eyes. Entire cities were covered in it. Regions that had been the most hostile to Christianity, that had pushed him out most aggressively, were now drowning in this darkness. He showed me that suicide rates had skyrocketed. Not just individual suicides, but mass suicides, entire families choosing to end it rather than face another day. The hospitals, of course, were closed. The mental health system had completely collapsed. There was no help available for people who were falling apart psychologically. I saw communities that had descended into absolute madness. People turning on each other for no reason. Violence that served no purpose, accomplished no goal. It was chaos for the sake of chaos, destruction for the sake of destruction. The red fog didn't just make people hopeless. In some cases, it made them cruel. But through all of this, he showed me something that gave me hope. In every neighborhood he showed me, no matter how dark things got, there were always a few houses that were different. Just a few. Sometimes only 1 or 2 per street. But they stood out like beacons. These houses had light when everything around them was dark. Not electric light, the power was still out everywhere. This was a different kind of light, a spiritual radiance that pushed back the darkness. The red fog would approach these homes and then recoil, unable to cross onto the property. He took me inside one of these protected homes. It was a modest house in a working-class neighborhood. Nothing fancy. The family wasn't wealthy. But the moment I entered, I felt the difference. There was peace inside these walls. Real, tangible peace. The parents weren't panicking. The children weren't traumatized. They were scared, yes, they weren't naive about what was happening outside. But they weren't consumed by fear. They had hope. He showed me why they were protected, and this is the message I was sent back to deliver. The house had 3 specific things that created a spiritual barrier against the fog. On the dining room table was a Bible. Not a phone with a Bible app. Not a tablet with digital scriptures. An actual physical book with paper pages. And it was open. He told me that when the power grid dies, every digital Bible becomes useless. Your phone is just a brick. Your tablet won't turn on. Your computer is dead. The Word of God needs to be physical in your home, accessible without electricity. But more than that, he revealed that an open Bible in a house does something in the spiritual realm. It's a declaration, a statement that this household belongs to him. It's his word ruling the atmosphere of the home. He explained that the Bible couldn't just be sitting closed on a shelf somewhere, collecting dust. It needed to be open, active, being read and spoken. The words of Scripture, when read aloud, create sound waves that have spiritual power. They establish authority. They draw a line in the spiritual realm that demons cannot cross. He showed me families in these protected homes reading the Bible together every day. Not long sessions necessarily, sometimes just a few verses, a psalm, a chapter. But consistent, daily engagement with the written word. Parents reading to children. Spouses reading to each other. Individuals reading alone. And every time those words were spoken out loud, the barrier around the house grew stronger. He showed me the second thing these protected households had done. In every case, they'd taken olive oil, simple, inexpensive olive oil from the grocery store, and prayed over it, consecrating it for spiritual use. Then they'd gone through their homes and anointed every entry point. The front door, the back door, the garage door, every window. They'd touched the oil to the frames, making the sign of the cross, praying for protection, claiming their home as holy ground. He reminded me of the Passover story from Exodus. When the final plague came to Egypt, when the angel of death moved through the land, the Israelites marked their doorposts with blood. When the angel saw the mark, he passed over that house. The people inside were protected. He told me the same principle still works. When homes are marked with oil in faith, when the physical act is combined with prayer and the declaration that this home belongs to him, it creates a spiritual seal. The red fog, the spirits of fear and depression, hit that seal and cannot cross it. They have no legal right to enter. The house has been claimed, marked, and protected. He showed me that this wasn't superstition or magic. It was a physical act of faith that unlocked spiritual protection. It was obedience to his instructions, taking authority over your own property, establishing your home as a sanctuary. The third thing he showed me was perhaps the most critical. In each protected home, there was a space, sometimes a closet, sometimes a corner of a room, sometimes even just a chair in a quiet spot, that had been dedicated entirely to prayer. He called this the war room. It was a place where the head of the household would go every single day to pray, to seek his face, to listen for his voice, to engage in spiritual warfare. He revealed to me that in 2026, when the cell towers are down, when the internet is dead, when there's no way to communicate with the outside world, this little prayer space becomes the most powerful communication system on earth. It's the only radio that can still connect to heaven. He showed me the difference between two fathers facing the same crisis. Both were Christians. Both believed in prayer. But one had a war room and one didn't. The father without a war room prayed occasionally. He'd send up quick prayers while he was working on his house repairs or standing watch at night. He'd pray before meals when he remembered. He'd pray when he was scared. But his prayers were scattered, distracted, mixed in with 1,000 other thoughts. As the months went on and the situation got worse, his faith began to crumble. The anxiety built up inside him with no outlet. The fear grew stronger. He had no place to process what was happening, no way to reset his mind and spirit. Eventually, the red fog found a crack in his defenses and seeped in. The other father had a war room. Every morning, no matter what else was happening, he went into that space, closed the door, and spent time with God. Sometimes 15 minutes. Sometimes an hour. It didn't matter how long. What mattered was the consistency, the discipline, the priority. In that quiet space, he would lay down all his fears. He would confess his doubts and his weakness. He would cry out for strength and wisdom. He would listen for direction. And every single time, he would come out of that room with renewed hope and clarity. This man stood firm. When his neighbors were falling apart, he remained stable. When his own emotions tried to betray him, he had this anchor point he could return to. The war room became his lifeline. He told me that the war room wasn't optional for survival. It was absolutely essential. Without it, even the strongest faith would eventually crumble under the weight of prolonged crisis and spiritual attack. As the vision began to fade, he looked at me with such intensity. He told me that I was being sent back with a specific message. I was to warn people about what was coming and tell them exactly how to prepare spiritually. He explained that most people were completely unprepared for this kind of assault. They were preparing physically, buying generators and stockpiling food, but they had no spiritual defenses. When the red fog came for them, they would fall immediately. He said time was short. He emphasized that this disaster would unfold in 2026, which meant there were only months to get ready. The window of grace was closing. He told me that many people wouldn't believe me. He warned me that I would be mocked, dismissed, maybe even lose friendships and professional respect. But he made it clear that I couldn't worry about their reactions. My job was to deliver the message. What they did with it was between them and him. Then, without warning, I felt a violent pull. It was like being grabbed by a giant hand and thrown backward through space. Everything went black. The pain hit me like a freight train. Every nerve in my body was screaming. There was a tube down my throat. Machines were beeping. Hands were all over me. I heard Dr. Martinez's voice, shaky with relief. He's back. We got him back. Ronald, can you hear me? Stay with us. I wanted to speak, to tell her about what I'd seen, but I couldn't with the tube in my throat. I could only lie there in agony, my mind racing with the weight of what I'd been shown. They kept me sedated for most of the first 24 hours. When I finally woke up fully, I was in the cardiac ICU. Jennifer was there, holding my hand. My daughters had been sent home. The ICU wouldn't let them visit because of the critical nature of my condition. The medical team informed me that I'd been dead for 9 minutes. They'd shocked me 4 times. The CPR had been so aggressive that they'd cracked 5 of my ribs. I had significant heart damage and would need surgery. But I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was the message I'd been given. My family thought I'd lost my mind. But I explained that I'd rather look crazy and keep them safe than appear normal and watch them fall victim to the red fog. Now, 3 weeks later, I'm writing this testimony. I'm sharing it with everyone who will listen. I don't know how much time we have. I don't know the exact date when the grid will fail. But I know it's coming in 2026. Please don't wait. Get the physical Bible. Get the olive oil. Create the war room. Do it today. Your physical preparations won't save you from what's coming. Only spiritual readiness will matter when the red fog begins to roll across this land. I am Dr. Ronald Chen. I died on December 27, 2025, and I was sent back with this warning. Do with it what you will.